There are inconsistencies between call logs and other information that lead us to believe that there could be calls missing. But just going from what we got a few hours after ending the call with Weldon, Brandon does that interview that he had told Weldon about earlier that morning. The interview he had to knock off while on the road with the good old boy detective, again, Brandon's words, that Brandon handpicked to investigate the shooting. That interview was necessary because, according to Brandon, Weldon had called him from the scene and they needed to do this so Scott's family couldn't accuse them of doing anything corrupt down the road. Now, Brandon was obviously worried about the appearance of impropriety from the very, very beginning. In our opinions, he didn't seem bothered by the impropriety itself, just that people would accuse them of that, and therefore they needed to preemptively cover their butts. Here's what Brandon said happened in the 2 phone calls he had with Brandon from the scene of Scott's death.
Mr. Strickland, I think Mr. Boyd had called you shortly after that incident. Could you just tell me what he said?
And he said, I need you to come to me right now. And I said, well, what's going on? What's happened? And he said, there's a guy, he just pulled a gun on me and was shooting at me, and I had to shoot back. And I said, well, where are you? And he said, I'm at Camp Swamp Road and Highway 9. Can you please come to me? And I said, you had to shoot somebody. And I'm just recalling in my mind, it's not word for word. I said, you had to shoot somebody? He said, yeah. He said, the guy was trying to kill me. I said, is the guy, I said, you need to call 911. He said, well, the police, I've already done that. He said, the police are here. I said, okay. I said, Weldon, is the guy alive? He said, no, I think he's dead. And I said, okay, well, you need to get off the phone with me. You need to talk with the officers and take care of that with the officers on scene.
And there was never any mention of that he knew this fella or anything like that?
No, and I didn't ask him, and he never brought it up that he knew the guy or didn't know the guy. He just said they were traveling on Highway 9 and a guy run them off the road and was wanting a gun. And I got very little from him initially. When I was talking to him, I was trying to, paint a mental picture of what he's telling me happened. But he said the guy was shot at him and the guy was trying to kill him and he shot back and he believed the guy was dead.
How official of them. You can almost hear their brains clapping their little hands together with satisfaction, as in, well, that's taken care of now. Did you also notice in that interview how Brandon didn't reiterate the lie that Weldon had told him in that first call made from the crime scene? Weldon had told him initially that the reason he was on Camp Swamp Road in the first place was because he had pulled off to fix his trailer, and that's when he was ambushed by Scott. This, again, is another really important detail because did Brandon know that Weldon's version of what happened contained a lie? And was Brandon not repeating that lie because he wanted a clean record that showed Weldon being consistent with the 911 call, when we all know that wasn't true? But it raises this question. If Brandon knew that Weldon's trailer fixing story was a lie, or at least not the thing that Weldon said in his 911 call as to why he was following Scott, then why was Brandon continuing to help Weldon? Because why would Weldon lie about the reason for making that turn if all was copacetic, if it was really about him following Scott to tell the police? Another important detail, like we said, Brandon had had at least 6 calls with Weldon at this point, but Brandon didn't mention those additional calls with Weldon to Alan, did he? If the first ones needed to be explained, then certainly the rest of them should have also been explained for the record. Beyond all that, though, did you notice what Brandon didn't put on the official record detailing his calls with Weldon? He didn't put on the record that the night of the shooting, Brandon had told Weldon he had the right people coming to him to take care of him. He left that part out. Why am I dancing around this? Brandon lied. It was a lie. He didn't just tell Weldon to talk to the police. He told Weldon not to worry because he was sending help. Again, here is what Brandon said to Alan Jones.
And you just referred him to the officers that were on scene at that point?
Yeah. I told him he needed to call 911 or call the police, and he said he hadn't. The police were there, and I told him he needed to speak with the officers who were on scene. And that was pretty much the gist of the conversation till I called him back and told him that I was not going to be able to come to the scene. And he said that he understood. And from there, and I ended a phone conversation.
And again, here is what Brandon allegedly said to Weldon in the phone call he is outlining for Alan, so there won't be an appearance of impropriety.
Look, I got the right people. I got the people coming that need to come, but I need you to listen to me and understand me for a second, okay?
Okay.
And it might not make sense now, but it'll make sense later. That keeps it clean. And if what you're telling me is a case and it's a self-defense thing,
yeah,
you're going to be fine. You're going to be fine. You just got to go through the process. They're going to ask you questions. They're probably going to take you to Conway to sit you down and talk to you.
So, you know, that is not the same thing. And this doesn't even factor in Brandon's call with Weldon from the next morning, when he admits to handpicking a quote-unquote good old boy detective for him and that he was working in the shadows the night before. Worse than that, this interview between Brandon and Alan Jones was not provided to Jennifer and Mark Tinsley with the rest of the case file. They only learned of it when they discovered Weldon's recorded phone calls hidden deep in folders in the mess of a data dump they got from Horry County. When they asked for the interview, Horry County appears to have slipped it into a Dropbox, claiming it had been there all along, not realizing that the date of its very recent upload gave them away.